Our story begins at a party where a game of truth or dare has taken a turn. After losing, a man's girlfriend is told to call the person she regrets losing most. She asks the man on the other end if he would give her a home if she got a divorce. His affirmative answer leaves the room in stunned silence. Everyone expects Jiang Fan to fly into a rage and flip the table, but instead, he calmly slides the ring off his finger. To be honest, he's remarkably composed. Since they haven't officially registered the marriage, he tells her it isn't too late to break up. Without waiting for her to speak, he turns and leaves. While walking away, he calls his parents in the capital to tell them he's finally coming home to marry. They are overjoyed that their son, Fan, has changed his mind. After all, he is the sole heir to the massive Jiang group. His mother reminds him that if he hadn't insisted on working outside for experience, he'd be married already. She explains that he should have taken over the family business long ago. She and his father have already scouted the perfect match and were just waiting for his word. Hearing the relief in his parents' voices, Fan feels a wave of guilt wash over him. His tone softens as he speaks to them, which is a rare change of pace. He tells them he will follow their arrangements entirely. His mother suggests January 19th for the wedding and asks when he plans to return home. She asks if he wants to meet his future bride beforehand so they can get acquainted. As his mother rambles on with excitement, Fan feels a slight headache coming on. Deep down, he doesn't actually care who he marries. The spark of interest simply isn't there. He eventually interrupts his mother's enthusiastic planning. He tells her he wants to return to the Jiang family early to help them with the business. Since the marriage is just a formality, there is no need to meet. He promises to be back the day before the ceremony. Just as he hangs up, the bedroom door is pushed open from the outside, catching him off guard. He instinctively turns his head and sees Ningbing walking in with a frown. She immediately asks him what wedding he was just talking about. Facing Ningbing's confusion, Fan calmly puts his phone away. He offers a casual excuse, claiming a friend is getting married and asked him to be the best man. Hearing this, the tension in Ningbing's face finally relaxes. She doesn't press him further, seemingly satisfied with the explanation, for now, at least. He places his phone on the table and heads into the bathroom. A moment later, the sound of the shower begins, but then the phone on the table starts buzzing. The persistent notifications continue to chime. After a moment of hesitation, the screen is unlocked, revealing a message from a man named Shun Haoyu. Haoyu asks if she remembers what was said back then, mocking the idea of her actually wanting to marry Jiang Fan. The words hit like a physical blow. Fan pauses for a moment, his heart tightening. He slowly scrolls up to see the messages Ningbing had sent just 10 minutes earlier. The messages she sent catch his eye. Shun Haoyu, in 33 days, it will be your 28th birthday. Do you still remember what you promised me back then? He puts the phone back and leans against the sofa. A flood of memories rushes back. When he was 18, he returned to the country for his aunt's wedding and enrolled in Yun University. To enjoy a quiet college life and for personal safety, he never mentioned his true identity to anyone. Then came his senior year. At the freshman orientation, he stepped on stage to help a roommate, performing a single accompaniment. As he carried his instrument off stage, he looked down and saw Bai Ningbing. She was wearing a white gauze dress, holding a bouquet, her eyes sparkling as she watched him. She asked for his contact information. Being a fan of beauty himself, he agreed on the spot, and they began talking every day. They would accidentally run into each other everywhere. By the third month, Ningbing confessed her feelings, and he was completely smitten. It was love at first sight, so he had no reason to refuse. They stayed together from the age of 21 until 28. For 7 years, his family urged him to return for an arranged marriage. He refused repeatedly and tried to gauge her thoughts on their future. But whenever the word marriage came up, Ningbing avoided it like the plague, cutting the conversation short. At first, he assumed she simply wasn't ready for commitment. But as it kept happening, he sensed something was wrong. Then, 2 weeks ago, he heard the truth. During a casual chat after some drinks, he learned that the person in Ningbing's heart had always been her childhood friend, Shun Haoyu. Unfortunately, it was a one-sided love. Haoyu only saw her as a friend. Her initial approach toward Fan was merely because of that first night. That evening, Haoyu was with someone else, and Fan's appearance on stage reminded her slightly of the man she actually loved. To soothe her heartbreak and spite Haoyu, she chose Fan. Over the next few years, the situation only grew more complicated. Haoyu went through dozens of relationships. Every time Ningbing heard he was single again, she considered going to find him. But before she could speak, Haoyu would find a new target, leaving her even more devastated than before. It was a cycle of grief. 7 years passed this way, and they never broke up. Yet Ningbing never stopped waiting for Haoyu to finally choose her. She was waiting for a drunken joke Haoyu made in their youth. Ningbing, wait for me. When I'm 28, if we are both single. If we're both still single, why don't we just give it a try? Every year since, she had asked him the same question, and now, finally, she had reached the year of Shun Haoyu's 28th birthday. As Fan looked through the messages on Ningbing's phone, he could only offer a bitter smile. In 33 days, it would be Haoyu's birthday, and the day Fan had chosen to end this, return home, and marry someone else. Seeing Ningbing head into the study, we see Fan follow suit by turning off the lights and retreating to bed. Time passes slowly in the dark. Eventually, the softest sound of footsteps breaks the silence. A glowing phone is placed on the nightstand, and she quietly lies down behind him. A long silence follows until her breathing becomes steady and rhythmic. Only then does Fan open his eyes and reach out his hand to take her phone once more. He opens the chat to find 4 new words, never forgotten. It was a simple phrase, really. Yet he could easily picture her expression as she typed them, biting her lip, her eyes fixed intently on the light of the screen. He imagined her gaze, sharp and focused, as she waited for a reply that might never come. It was the kind of devotion she only ever reserved for Hao-yu. This level of caution and care was a side of her he had never truly possessed. To be honest, it was a painful realization. A bitter smile touched his lips as he realized she was banking everything on a childhood promise, waiting for Hao-yu to finally claim her. He didn't sleep a wink that night, keeping his eyes shut until the morning light brought the sound of her stirring beside him. He finally opened his eyes and suggested she leave work early today. Ningbing, busy with her skincare routine, looked at him with genuine confusion. "Is there a reason?" she asked. After a long pause, he replied slowly, "It's your birthday. Had you forgotten?" Her body stiffened for a moment before she gave a slow, distracted nod. It seems the pact with Hao-yu had consumed her entire being. She had pushed everything else aside, including her own life. And as Fan thought back on the 2 months he'd spent planning a surprise, he felt a wave of hollow disappointment. Ningbing, however, didn't even notice the look on his face as she continued her mourning. She told him to keep things simple this year, unlike the grand celebrations of the past. Usually, he would exhaust himself to make her happy. He had always gone above and beyond, though she never truly appreciated the effort. Hearing her dismissive request, his voice remained calm. His voice carried a hint of self-mockery as he explained that the banquet was already prepared. Everyone had promised to come. It was too late to cancel. He had started planning this party 3 months ago. At that time, he had no idea her heart belonged to someone else. Otherwise, he never would have bothered. Hearing his explanation, Ningbing remained silent for a long moment. She simply picked up her phone and walked out of the bedroom, but just before she turned, we see Fan catch a glimpse of her slightly furrowed brow. Later, upon arriving at the office, he went straight to the manager's room to submit his resignation. When he emerged with the resignation report in hand, the office erupted in a frenzy of questions. They all wanted to know, was he really leaving? They asked why he was quitting so suddenly, and if he had found a new job. Some even joked that he was going home to inherit a billion-dollar fortune. Faced with their concern, Fan set his things down and offered a gentle smile. He told them he was leaving to get married, and his colleagues nodded in realization. However, a close friend leaned in to ask a few more questions. He wondered if Fan's girlfriend had finally agreed to marry him after all this time. He asked what had finally changed her mind. Fan didn't feel like explaining the truth, so he simply shifted the topic and thanked them for their years of support. He promised to treat them to dinner later. After work, he spent 2 hours eating with a few colleagues, and by the time he reached the hotel, it was already 8 o'clock. He hurried to the private dining room, but just as he was about to push the door open, a conversation from inside made him freeze. Someone asked who Ningbing was going to pick up in such cold weather. The answer was simple: Shin Hao-yu. One guest mentioned they had overheard that Hao-yu was returning today, and Ningbing had rushed off to meet him with eager eyes. The others wondered if she was overjoyed. It was her 28th birthday today, and in just over a month, Hao-yu would also be 28. They speculated that his return at this specific time meant he was finally coming to fulfill his promise. Word was that Hao-yu was single again. It seemed almost certain they would end up together. But then, a voice raised a difficult question. What would happen to Fan? They had kept the truth from him for 7 years. He didn't even know who Hao-yu was, yet he remained devotedly in love with Ningbing. But as they noted, there was nothing to be done when Ningbing was so head over heels for Hao-yu. To be honest, Fan's devotion didn't stand a chance. If Hao-yu agreed to the pact, Fan would be dumped immediately. They chalked it up to bad luck, noting that since he had no powerful background, it would be easy enough to dismiss him. They admitted he had been wonderful to them and to Ningbing over the years, but that changed nothing. Inside, the friends agreed that as Ningbing's best friends, they had to take her side. They decided that if a breakup really happened, they shouldn't let Ningbing feel awkward. They planned to step in and offer Fan a car or a house as a breakup fee. Outside, Fan listened quietly without making a sound. Perhaps because he had already decided to leave, he didn't feel the same crushing pain he had weeks ago. Instead, he found the situation somewhat ironic. He wondered what kind of relationship he had been in for 7 years if Ningbing needed her friends to pay him off. But this time, he was the one leaving first. As he stood outside the door, a few waiters arrived pushing carts of wine. Fan stepped back to give them room, and as the door swung open, the chatter inside stopped instantly. Acting as if he had heard nothing, he walked in with a practiced smile and greeted everyone warmly. After a few moments of small talk, the door opened again. Ningbing walked in, accompanied by a man Fan had never met before. Fan quietly observed the stranger, noting that the man's silhouette bore a striking resemblance to his own. Ningbing led her guest around the room, introducing him to everyone before finally stopping in front of Fan. She introduced the newcomer as Shun Hao-yu, a childhood friend she grew up with. Then, after a brief, telling hesitation, Ningbing continued by introducing Fan as merely a common friend. When she said those words, She fully expected Fan to get angry. However, things didn't go as she imagined. Fan showed no reaction at all. He simply looked up, gave her a long, deep look, and then withdrew his hand. He stepped back to maintain a polite distance, a faint, perfectly composed smile on his lips. He greeted Hao-yu politely, confirming that he was indeed just a common friend. With the introductions over, the room quickly regained its lively energy. Hao-yu was clearly an extrovert who could talk to anyone. He moved through the crowd with a glass in hand, inviting everyone to drink and play games. At one point, Hao-yu was so focused on his cards that he couldn't use his hands, so he asked for someone to feed him some watermelon. Without a second thought, Ningbing used her own fork to feed him. Hao-yu didn't seem to mind the intimacy either. He leaned over to eat and then picked up his glass to finish his wine. From a few meters away, Fan watched as Ningbing then took that same glass and began drinking from it herself. She drank glass after glass, and we see that each time, she placed her lips exactly where Hao-yu's had been just moments before. By the end, she was clearly a bit tipsy, but the birthday traditions had to proceed. The guests began singing, urging her to stand up, blow out the candles, and make a wish. The noisy room suddenly fell silent as Fan stood up to personally wheel out the cake and light the candles, watching her closely. Looking at the candles forming the number 28, Ningbing rubbed her temples as if trying to clear the drunken fog. Her gaze, already somewhat blurred, wandered across the room before she finally raised a single finger. This year, she announced, she didn't want to make a wish. Instead, she wanted to ask a question. As she spoke, she pointed directly at Hao-yu, her eyes, though far from sober, burning with an intense heat as they landed on him. Hao-yu, she noted, you are also about to turn 28. I want to ask you something. Do you have a girlfriend right now? The moment those words left her mouth, the onlookers began exchanging glances. Facing the prying eyes coming from every direction, Hao-yu blinked and gave his answer. He didn't have anyone. After a brief, heavy silence, someone let out a surprised shout of excitement, and the room instantly erupted. Several of her best friends, already quite tipsy themselves, stood up and began pushing the drunken Ningbing around in a celebratory dance. Amidst this chaotic scene, Fan sat perfectly still, calmly playing the role of the common friend who was supposedly kept in the dark and knew nothing. The party raged on until the early hours of the morning. When the guests finally scattered, Fan helped Ningbing into the car. Still immersed in her earlier joy, she collapsed into his arms and began pouring out her heart. With a sob in her voice, she pleaded for Hao-yu not to leave, asking him to stay by her side. She asked why everyone else could save her, but he couldn't, crying that she had waited for him for so many years. The driver in the front seat listened to this the whole way, quietly chuckling to himself. As they prepared to get out, seeing Fan supporting the drunken woman, the driver couldn't resist a comment. Sir, your girlfriend really loves you, he said. Fan gave him a faint smile and replied quite calmly, she loves Hao-yu, but I am not Hao-yu. The next morning, waking up with a hangover, Ningbing remembered the night's events and immediately began to explain. Fan, she said, the moment I arrived yesterday, I was forced to drink so much. I probably said a lot of nonsense. It was just the alcohol talking, she insisted, telling him not to take it to heart. Fan hadn't expected her to remember the night before, nor did he expect her to come up with such a clumsy excuse for her behavior. For some reason, looking at Fan's calm and expressionless face, she began to recall his reaction when she introduced him to Hao-yu. For some reason, Ningbing felt a sudden wave of panic. She thought it over, sensed something was wrong, and quickly changed the subject. Yesterday I was so focused on drinking with everyone that I left you aside, she said, asking Fan if he was perhaps a bit angry with her. She suggested a date after work, but Fan simply replied that he had things to do and wouldn't be going. Seeing his flat refusal, Ningbing became even more insistent on making it up to him, and eventually, he found he couldn't say no. He agreed to meet her. That evening, just as he finished dressing to head out, a message from his friend Chin Hao suddenly popped up. Hao asked if he'd told his girlfriend about resigning, noting she had just come looking for him and seemed quite angry. Before he could finish reading, Ningbing's name began flashing on his screen. A flicker of solemnity crossed Fan's eyes as he stared at the phone, and after a brief hesitation, he pressed answer. Ningbing's voice came through, sounding utterly exasperated as she demanded to know why his colleague said he'd resigned to go get married. While Fan was still searching for an explanation, Ningbing continued her cold, relentless scolding without a single pause. I told you I have no plans to get married yet, she snapped. It was only then that Fan realized she actually thought he was trying to force her into marriage, which, naturally, explained the temper. He patiently explained that his comments to his colleagues were just jokes they had taken seriously, and that he resigned simply because he was tired and needed a rest. Hearing this, the voice in his ear finally returned to a normal tone. Don't make those kinds of jokes anymore, she warned. Fan gave a quiet, firm response, and then Ningbing asked where he was, offering to come to him. He was about to give the address when he heard a faint, subtle laugh. It sounded exactly like Hao-yu. The word okay lingered on his tongue for a moment before he changed it to no need. The call was disconnected almost immediately. Watching the screen fade to black, a self-mocking smile touched his lips. If she really wanted to find him, why hang up so quickly? She was just going through the motions, he realized, wondering why he'd even taken her seriously. He hailed a cab and headed to the restaurant. After hearing his name, the waiter led him directly to the rooftop dining area. But when the door opened, he found a table full of food and not a single person in sight. Seeing his confused expression, the waiter respectfully explained that Miss Ningbing had called 10 minutes ago to order the meal, asking him to eat first as she had an emergency and would be late. Fan thought back to that earlier phone call. As Fan thought of that call, a look of realization crossed his face. This emergency likely meant she was off with Hao-yu again. In her mind, it wasn't even a lie. After all, when it came to her true love, even the smallest trifle was an emergency. We see him decide not to dwell on it, entering the private room as the waiter diligently prepared the table and introduced each dish. Looking at the spread of seafood, Fan narrowed his eyes. During his years in Europe, he'd eaten so much of it, he'd grown tired. Even after returning home, he still hadn't regained a taste for it. In the past, he would have simply endured it for her sake. But now, he had no desire to keep compromising his own comfort. With a wave of his hand, he told the waiter to take it away. The waiter hesitated, noting that Miss Ningbing had already paid a very high price for this specific meal. "Are you sure, Mr. Jiang?" He warned that there would be no refunds if the food was removed. Fan simply raised an eyebrow and pulled a card from his bag. He told the man to clear the table and that he would pay for a new order himself. "Don't worry," he added, "I can afford it." By the time he finished his meal, Ningbing still hadn't appeared. Not wanting to wait any longer, he paid and began the journey home. Halfway there, several messages popped up. Ningbing asked if he could stay somewhere else for the night, explaining that Hao-yu had suddenly returned. She claimed his old house wasn't ready and he was suffering from the cold. Apparently, his stomach was acting up and he needed care. She asked if Hao-yu could stay at their place for the night. It's quite a delicate balance, caring for Hao-yu while hiding her relationship with Fan. To be honest, the irony of the situation was becoming absurd. This time, Fan wasn't in the mood to play along with her little drama. He asked why she insisted on hiding their relationship from her friend and how long she planned to keep up the charade. A long silence followed before she finally replied. She offered no explanation, sending only a single date, January 18th. In the past, he wouldn't have understood the significance of that day, but now, he knew perfectly well it was Hao-yu's birthday. If Hao-yu kept his promise to be with her that day, she would likely break up with Fan without a second thought. But if Hao-yu rejected her, she would settle for Fan and suggest marriage. He was merely the safety net for her heart's gamble. By framing her true feelings as a test, she had a perfect exit strategy regardless of the outcome. It was a flawless, if cruel, plan. To be honest, Fan almost had to admire her strategy, but he was no longer willing to be the backup in her emotional games, so he didn't reply. Instead, he simply turned off his phone, checked into a hotel, and after a few drinks to settle his nerves, slept soundly until the next afternoon. When he finally turned his phone back on to check the time, dozens of messages flooded in, most of them, predictably, from Ningbing. A few were from her friends, demanding to know where he was and why he wasn't answering. "Don't try to scare us," one message read. They claimed Ningbing had been looking for him frantically all night. Looking at these accusatory messages, we see a cold smile cross Fan's face. He wondered if simply turning off a phone to sleep was truly scary. Besides, every one of those friends knew that Hao-yu was the one Ningbing truly cherished. Would she really care if he lived or died? Just as he was processing this, Ningbing's name flashed on the screen as she called him again. Her temper was frayed as she snapped. "Fan, Hao-yu was just staying for one night. Was it really necessary to get this angry?" She told him that even if he was unhappy, he shouldn't express it this way. Fan, exhausted by the drama, didn't even bother to explain himself. He offered a simple excuse. He wasn't upset. His phone had just run out of battery. In the past, Ningbing would have likely believed him without question. But today, for some reason, she grew suspicious and asked why he was always reachable before, yet happened to have a dead phone last night. Hearing her interrogation, Fan fell silent for a moment as a flood of memories from their past began to resurface. He remembered a late night years ago when Ningbing had a stomach ache and called him by mistake while trying to reach her secretary. The moment he heard she was in pain, he had rushed out to bring her medicine. Then there was her business trip abroad last year. Despite the 8-hour time difference, she had called him at 4 in the morning to ask about a document, and he had forced himself awake to help. He had even checked the security cameras for her. Then, 3 months ago, he underwent surgery for appendicitis. Even as the anesthesia was barely wearing off, she had messaged him saying she wanted milk tea, and he had asked a nurse to get it for her. Each of these moments was a testament to how deeply he had loved her, a devotion that, sadly, she had never truly seen. Thinking of this, his voice took on a trace of self-mockery as he told her he only kept his phone on because he was afraid she might need him. He added that she clearly didn't need him last night. Hearing his cryptic tone, Ningbing felt a strange, sudden pang of unease deep within her heart. We see that they had never truly fought before. Fan usually avoided explanations, and Ningbing never pressed him, even when he was upset. A little bit of coaxing was usually enough to fix things, especially since Fan had always taken care of every detail of her daily life and their dates. Deep down, Ningbing had to admit that Fan was a nearly perfect boyfriend, and as she recalled his past kindness, her heart began to soften. Her voice lost its sharp edge as she told him she understood, claiming she was only so blunt because she had been worried about him. After a brief apology, she asked where he was so she could find him, but to be honest, Fan had no desire to see her at all. He simply told her not to bother and took a taxi home, only to have the nanny inform him that Ningbing had just left the house. He didn't need to guess to know she had likely been called away by Hao again, especially with the lingering scent of men's cologne in the air. Without asking where she went, he quietly asked the nanny to open the windows for some fresh air. For the next 2 weeks, he didn't see Ningbing once. It was as if he had forgotten. He even had a girlfriend. No calls, no messages. Even as he saw her life unfolding through Haoyu's social media posts, he knew exactly where she was, but he felt no urge to question her or delve into whatever game she was playing with her heart. For Fan, every day was now just a countdown, and he had no energy left to waste on someone he was destined to say goodbye to. On New Year's Eve, as snow began to fall, he found himself in a good mood, watching movies by the floor-to-ceiling window all evening. By midnight, amidst the roar of fireworks outside, he felt a bit tired and leaned back in his chair to browse social media in the quiet room. Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside the door, and as he sat up, he saw a completely intoxicated Ningbing stumbling back into the house. She swayed as she walked, tossing a pile of shopping bags onto the sofa before beginning to unpack them right in front of him. She showed him 2 scarves she had just bought, asking if he was cold since the snow was so heavy outside. Yes, a bit late for concern, perhaps. Then she pulled out a Rolex she had bought days ago as a New Year's gift, asking him with a slurred voice if he liked it. She began stuffing the gifts into his arms, and as he tried to untangle himself from the scarves, she grabbed his hand to apologize. She told him she was sorry for being so busy and not coming home to see him, asking if he was still angry with her. She even brought up the time she stood him up, pleading for his forgiveness and promising that they would be happy together from now on. As she spoke, Ningbing leaned in close, trying to kiss him, but Fan couldn't stand the heavy smell of alcohol on her breath or her sudden, erratic behavior. After much effort, he managed to coax her into the bedroom. Once she fell asleep, he returned to the living room to tidy up the shopping bags scattered everywhere. He picked up his phone and saw post after post of couples showing off their love, but it was Haoyu's update that truly caught his eye. It was a grid of 9 photos showing Haoyu with a new girl in the snow, captioned with the rather interesting phrase, "Meeting the right person during the first snow." Seeing this, all of Fan's lingering doubts were instantly resolved. It was no wonder Ningbing had suddenly come home drunk and tried to make amends. The man she actually loved had started a new relationship, and really, if that hadn't happened, she likely wouldn't have spared a thought for her old boyfriend. A trace of irony flashed in Fan's eyes as he unbuckled the expensive watch from his wrist and tossed it onto the table without a second thought. Over the next few days, Ningbing seemed like a completely different person, staying home constantly and insisting on spending every moment by his side. When his stomach felt uneasy, she stayed close to cook rice porridge for him. When he lingered on a travel advertisement, she immediately began planning a trip. Perhaps because her own heart had been wounded, she was being far more attentive than ever before, but Fan was no longer moved by these gestures. He watched quietly as Ningbing played the role of a perfect girlfriend, observing her efforts with a detached, almost clinical perspective. As he watched her bustle about just to please him, he felt no guilt whatsoever. To be honest, he felt she owed him this much. He told himself that her current devotion was simply a way of paying back her past debts, which made his own lack of emotion much easier to carry. Once the snow stopped, his mother sent over photos of several wedding suits, asking which style he preferred for his upcoming nuptials. He scrolled through the images, zooming in to inspect the fine details of the fabric, so focused that he didn't hear Ningbing approaching on tiptoe. He only realized she was there when she snatched the phone away, and he turned to see her expression darken instantly at the sight of the groom's attire. She demanded to know why he was looking at wedding suits, but Fan didn't even blink as he smoothly offered a lie. He reminded her that a friend was getting married soon and needed help choosing a new suit after an issue with the original one. A plausible excuse, naturally. Seeing no change in his calm expression, Ningbing's suspicion slowly faded, and she handed the phone back while asking when the wedding was. She even offered to accompany him to the ceremony, and seeing her sincere expression, a very subtle, nuanced smile played across Fan's face. Fan asked her if she really intended to go on January 19th. Hearing that specific date, Ningbing seemed to freeze for a moment as he watched her closely. He waited patiently for an answer, and after a long silence, she managed a very forced smile, telling him they would see when the time came. After that question, Ningbing sank back into a state of melancholy, spending her days moving about as if she were trapped in a dream. Using the wedding as a convenient cover, Fan didn't bother hiding his actions and began packing his luggage right in front of her. It had been 6 years since he moved into this riverside apartment after graduation, and while his things filled the rooms, he only packed what he had bought himself. He placed his belongings into the suitcase, leaving everything else behind. After all, once he returned to Jingbei, he would be on his own turf again. Anything he lacked, he could simply buy there, so he decided to leave the rest. Occasionally, Ningbing would snap out of her daze and look through his suitcase. Even so, she never asked a single question. He knew her heart was entirely focused on waiting for Hao-yu to send her an invitation to his birthday party. She didn't even notice him quietly throwing away many personal items. As long as the couple's trinkets he once cherished remained on display, she suspected nothing. It never crossed her mind that this departure was permanent. In her eyes, his love was so absolute he would die for her. So why would she doubt him now? Adopting a mindset of letting go, he found the packing process surprisingly easy. On January 18th, the sky turned a heavy, somber gray. The weather was gloomy, matching the quiet tension in the apartment as the final day arrived. Looking at the sky, someone asked if he should head to the airport early since it looked like rain was coming. Ningbing looked up and instinctively asked why he was going to the airport. He reminded her about the wedding he was attending the next day. He calmly asked if she had made up her mind about coming along, watching her face as he waited for her response. She remained silent for a few seconds before finally deciding it was too far and declining, though she offered to drive him to the airport. This answer didn't surprise him at all. He finished his last piece of toast, went to the bedroom, and picked up his luggage. Just as Ningbing buckled her seatbelt in the car, her phone chimed. She checked it hurriedly, and a sudden change washed over her. A joy she could no longer hide flickered in her usually cold eyes. She dropped her phone, unbuckled her seatbelt, and pushed the car door open immediately. Only after stepping out did she realize what she was doing, leaning back in to explain to Fan that a sudden emergency had come up at the company. She told him she had urgent matters to handle first and would have the driver take him to the airport instead. After all their years together, she still couldn't be honest. From the flickering, uncertain look in Ningbing's eyes, Fan could easily tell she was lying, but he didn't call her out on it. He simply nodded gently. While waiting for the driver, he opened his social feed and, as expected, saw Hao-yu's birthday party photos. The young beauty who was usually by Hao-yu's side was nowhere to be seen. It appeared he was single again. This meant that Hao-yu's old promise, the one where he vowed to be with Ningbing if he wasn't married by 28, was suddenly back on the table. He had hope once more. No wonder she was so thrilled. By the time the driver arrived, Ningbing had already changed into a stunning white evening gown. Radiant and full of energy, she climbed into her sports car. She rolled down the window and gave him a quick wave, asking when he'd be back. Fan just smiled without giving her an answer. Ningbing didn't seem to care, quickly speeding away in her car while he watched from the passenger seat of his ride. Only after her car vanished from sight did he softly tell the driver it was time to go. A light rain began to fall, blurring the world outside. The droplets streaked the windows until everything was a haze. He didn't want to look anymore, so he closed his eyes and whispered a final goodbye in his heart. Before boarding, he received a call from his father. The older man asked what time he would arrive so he could send a driver to meet him. Fan didn't refuse. He wanted to be home as soon as possible. He hadn't slept well the night before, and the exhaustion was finally catching up to him. As soon as he sat on the plane, he drifted off, sleeping through the entire 2-hour flight. After landing in Jingbei, he put on his hat and sunglasses. He had barely stepped out of the terminal when a crisp, clear voice called his name. Still half asleep, Fan looked up to see who was stopping him. The woman explained that Uncle Gao had sent her to pick him up. Fan squinted at her, assuming this Rian must be the driver his father mentioned. He wondered briefly why the driver was such a beautiful girl, but he was too tired to care. He leaned against the car window and fell asleep again. When he finally woke up, he saw an unfamiliar villa outside the window. With a voice thick with suspicion, he asked where they were, knowing it wasn't his home. Rian gave a soft, knowing laugh. She told him it wasn't his home yet, but it would be tomorrow. To be precise, she called it their new wedding house. The mention of a wedding house snapped him wide awake. He froze in place, pulling off his hat and sunglasses to get a better look at her. He looked down and met Rian's smiling eyes. Seeing the sheer shock written all over his face, she couldn't help but be amused by his reaction. Once the reason for the confusion became clear, she proactively reached out her hand, realizing she had forgotten to introduce herself as Lu Rian. Fan felt a wave of awkwardness wash over him. He managed to squeeze out a polite smile and quickly shook Rian's hand, his voice carrying a hint of sheepish guilt as he apologized for being so groggy and mistaking her identity. He introduced himself as Jiang Fan, and Rian simply laughed, her voice light and cheerful. To be honest, she didn't seem to mind his confusion in the slightest. She told him they would have plenty of time to get to know each other later. Meanwhile, we see Ningbing standing outside a private lounge, carefully smoothing out every wrinkle in her dress. Her phone vibrated a few times, and when she checked it, she saw a message from the driver confirming that Fan had already boarded his flight. After hesitating for a long moment, she finally decided to send him a quick message, asking him to let her know when he arrived safely. Once she had composed herself, Ningbing took a deep breath and pushed open the door to the party. Her eyes immediately locked onto the one person she had been dreaming of. Her heart began to race as she walked toward him. Even from a distance, she could hear a group of men teasing Hao-yu about something. They were telling Hao-yu that he had to introduce her to them today after hiding her for so long. Hao-yu just told them to be patient. He promised that when it was time to make his birthday wish, he would give them all a real surprise, which, naturally, made Ningbing's heart flutter with anticipation. Hearing the word wish made Ningbing think back to her own birthday party a month ago. A quiet sense of hope began to bloom in her eyes. She wondered if the joke they had made when they were 16 was actually about to come true today. For the next few hours, she could think of nothing else. She nervously sipped her wine as the time passed. By the time the birthday cake was finally wheeled out, her hands were actually trembling with excitement. Her close friends gathered around her, their eyes filled with a knowing, playful glint. They whispered to her, asking how it felt to have her dream finally coming true. Ningbing just kept her head down, smiling silently. Her friend Tang Yin was enjoying the spectacle until she suddenly remembered something and leaned in close. She placed a hand on Ningbing's shoulder and asked what would happen to Jiang Fan if things actually worked out with Haoyu tonight. Hearing Fan's name in the middle of Haoyu's birthday celebration caused Ningbing's smile to vanish instantly. A sudden pang of guilt surfaced in her heart. Seeing her expression sour, her friends quickly moved to comfort her. They told her it was fine and that she should just break up with him now anyway. They dismissed him as just an ordinary boy who would be easy to deal with. After all, in their eyes, he was never really part of their world. They promised to handle it if he caused any trouble. Encouraged by their words, Ningbing finally reached for her phone to make a decision. She typed out a few words on her phone, but her finger hovered over the send button. Seeing her hesitate, her friends began to grow impatient. They grabbed her hand and pressed it for her. Below her previous message asking him to check in, a new, cold notification appeared on the screen. Let's break up. There was a 3-hour gap between the messages, and by now, Fan's plane should have already touched down. He would likely see the message very soon. While Ningbing was still lost in her thoughts, her friends pulled her toward the center of the room. Amidst the birthday songs and Ningbing's expectant gaze, Haoyu clasped his hands together. To be honest, he looked quite sincere as he made his wish. He prayed that at 28, everything would go his way, and that he could make next year's wish alongside Rushua. The smile on Ningbing's face vanished, leaving her deathly pale. Around the room, the other guests were equally stunned by the unexpected name. The crowd began to tease him, asking who this Rushua was. A slight blush crept onto Haoyu's face as he prepared to answer. He announced that she was his new girlfriend. Just as the words left his lips, the door to the lounge was pushed open from the outside. A beautiful young woman stepped inside, offering a graceful smile to the room. She introduced herself as Xiao Rushua, Haoyu's girlfriend. Amidst the noise, we see Haoyu happily holding his new girlfriend's hand, sharing the small details of their romance with his friends. Meanwhile, Ningbing sat in the corner, drowning her sorrows glass after glass with her friends until they were all quite intoxicated. Tang Yin stood up unsteadily and stumbled over to Haoyu. Under the bewildered stares of the guests, she decided to demand justice for her best friend. She asked Haoyu if he had forgotten the promise he made to Ningbing years ago. At those words, a flicker of curiosity crossed Rushua's face. Rushua asked what kind of promise it was, causing Haoyu's expression to turn incredibly sour in an instant. But Tang Yin was too drunk to care. Her other friends stepped up to back her up, reminding him that he promised to be with Ningbing at 28. They asked if he intended to be a liar, noting that they all remembered his words. Rushua's smile, which had been so bright, slowly began to fade. She turned her head and gave Haoyu a long, searching look, asking if it was true. Haoyu dismissed it as nothing more than a drunken joke. He argued that such things couldn't be taken seriously, especially since he had specified it was only if he were single, which he clearly wasn't. Every word felt like a blade twisting in Ningbing's heart. She clutched her chest, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. Clutching her chest as the pain reached its peak, she used the sofa for support and stood up. Then, under everyone's watchful eyes, she began to laugh like she had gone mad. She laughed hysterically, shouting that he was right. It didn't count. After all, if he had a girlfriend, she had a boyfriend too. It was all just a joke, she claimed. These few words allowed the smile to return to Xiao Rushua's face, who simply nodded in response. Rushua took Haoyu's hand and walked over to Ningbing, wearing an expression that suggested nothing at all had happened. She remarked that it must have been a misunderstanding, adding that she'd heard Ningbing had a boyfriend and wondered why she hadn't brought him along. Ningbing's mind was a complete blank, yet she forced a smile to meet Rushua's gaze, explaining that he was away at a wedding. He simply didn't have the time, she said. Rushua nodded understandingly, but beside her, a flicker of displeasure crossed Haoyu's eyes. His tone was thick with disbelief as he asked who this boyfriend was, noting that in all the time since his return, he'd never heard her mention him. Looking at Haoyu's face, Ningbing found herself unable to utter another word. Tang Yin quickly stepped forward to support her friend. She glared at Haoyu with resentment and mockingly announced that Jiang Fan was Ningbing's boyfriend. She reminded him that Jiang Fan was the most handsome boy at the birthday party. Haoyu suddenly recalled that night. He remembered the boy smiling and claiming they were just ordinary friends. Sensing something was off, he instinctively questioned the claim. He pointed out that on that day, both of them had said they were just ordinary friends. Tang Yin dismissed it as a simple lover's quarrel. Haoyu's face turned pale and then flushed with anger. He glanced at Tang Yin, unable to swallow his pride. He claimed that because he had seen so much of the world, he felt the need to ask more questions. Since they all insisted he was the boyfriend, Haoyu suggested calling him right then and there. He claimed he wanted to meet his new brother-in-law. In an instant, the faces of Ningbing and her friends turned grim. They were all thinking of the breakup message they had just sent. Just by looking at their expressions, Haoyu felt a surge of confidence. He pulled out his phone and found Jiang Fan's contact. He initiated a voice call. Realizing the secret was about to be exposed, the women tried to grab the phone, but Rushue stepped in to protect her man. Hao decided to go all the way, turning the volume to the maximum and holding the phone out for the entire room to hear. As the speakerphone turned on, the room fell silent, leaving only the ringing sound while Ningbing tucked her hands into her sleeves. She clenched her fists tightly, praying silently that Jiang Fan wouldn't answer the call, hoping that he hadn't yet seen the message. During that minute of ringing, Ningbing felt her heart would leap from her chest, just as the call was about to end automatically. And everyone began to lose interest. The call was finally connected. Jiang Fan asked if Mr. Shen needed something. Ningbing's face turned pale instantly, contrasting sharply with Hao Yu's face, which wore an unreadable, mocking smile. He replied that it was his birthday, and, having heard Jiang Fan was Ningbing's boyfriend, he wanted to invite him over. The phone went silent for a few seconds. Ningbing was so tense she could barely breathe until Jiang Fan spoke again. He apologized, saying he was in Jingbei and couldn't make it. Hearing his normal tone, Ningbing assumed he hadn't seen the text yet. She felt a brief moment of relief, but his words didn't stop there. He let out a meaningful sound and spoke with a hint of a smile. He clarified that he and Ningbing had already broken up, so Mr. Shen shouldn't misunderstand. Hao Yu was surprised, but mostly gloating. He asked when this happened. Jiang Fan replied it was just 10 minutes ago, right when he received her breakup message. Everyone watching the drama unfold looked like they wanted to laugh, but didn't dare. To be honest, the irony was hard to ignore. Hao Yu's face was oily with a forced smile as he coldly scanned the young socialites who had tried to stir up trouble. He told Jiang Fan he would pass on the message and thanked him. Jiang Fan then wished him a happy 28th birthday. He also wished that all lovers would end up together, whether intentional or not. He emphasized the words 28 years old quite heavily. It was as if he were signaling to everyone that he already knew the truth. No one in the room dared to speak up or ask questions. They could only watch as the call ended. The atmosphere in the room instantly dropped to freezing point and stayed silent for several minutes. Finally, Rushue stepped in to play the peacemaker, offering Ningbing a glass of wine to finally put the matter to rest. Ningbing drained every last drop of the wine before slamming the glass down heavily on the table. She left the party with her friends, but as she reached the door, she caught a few words between Rushue and the others. We overhear Hao Yu asking if this Mr. Jiang was from Jingbei, as the name seemed to ring a distant bell for him. He wondered if he was overthinking it. While outside the hall, Ningbing's friends quickly gathered around her. They pulled her into a private room, offering a chorus of comfort and insisting she was better off without Hao Yu. They claimed marrying a man like that would be a nightmare, given his track record of ex-girlfriends over the last 7 years. To be honest, marrying a notorious player who falls for everyone he sees is just asking for trouble later on. They urged her to stay with Jiang Fan instead, arguing he was better in every way and only spoke out of anger. The girls encouraged Ningbing to go back and coax him, certain that his deep love for her would lead to forgiveness. With her friends boosting her confidence, Ningbing felt her spirits lift slightly as she reached for her phone once more. She racked her brain to draft a message to Jiang Fan, claiming the breakup text was merely a lost bet during a game. She told him not to take it seriously, explaining it was a prank to see his reaction before asking about his trip. She asked if he had checked into his hotel or if he was busy setting up the wedding venue for their big day. She even offered to pick him up at the airport tomorrow, but after hitting send, she was met with total silence. Ningbing stared intensely at the screen, her heart racing with anxiety as her friends exchanged worried glances. They tried to distract her, suggesting that he was simply too busy with wedding preparations to check his phone. They promised that if he was truly angry, they would all travel to Jingbei tomorrow to help her apologize in person. We returned to Jiang Fan, who was in a room with Ruyan when Ningbing's message finally arrived on his phone. He couldn't help but laugh out loud at the very first line, amazed by her ability to invent such a convenient excuse. Unfortunately for her, he no longer believed a single word she said, knowing exactly why she was reaching out now. He could perfectly imagine the scene. Ningbing, humiliated by Hao Yu, crawling back to him to save face after that bizarre phone call. In that moment, he felt a flicker of regret that he hadn't been there to witness her embarrassment firsthand. Ruyan, who had been focused on her own tasks, looked up and asked if he disliked the wedding dress, offering to have a new one sent over immediately. Jiang Fan assured her it wasn't necessary, though he admitted feeling a bit of regret for missing a good show just to get married. Naturally, she was curious about what show he meant. He felt a brief urge to share, but he knew better than to discuss an ex-girlfriend in front of his new fiancée, so he decided to change the subject. He brushed it off as a few friends back in the city having a birthday mishap that caused some confusion, suggesting they focus on the wedding instead. Seeing that he wasn't in the mood to elaborate, Ruyan didn't push further. Instead, she brought over some snacks, asking if he was starting to feel hungry. She suggested he have a bite to tide him over, promising to take him out for a proper meal later, and asked if he had any specific cravings. Admitting he was indeed hungry, Jiang Fan noted down what Ruyan wanted to eat before heading out to make the arrangements himself. As he placed the order, he found himself lost in thought, reflecting on the information he had gathered about Ruyan, the third daughter of the Jingbei Lu group. She was 2 years younger than him, with one sister 2 years her senior and another eldest sister who was 5 years older than her. That eldest sister, now the vice president of the Lu group, had raised Rian personally, which explained her dignified and refined character. Over the years, the Jiang and Lu families had grown close, and after much careful consideration, the Jiangs had tentatively proposed this marriage alliance. According to his mother, Rian had agreed to the match after seeing just one photo of him, appearing quite satisfied with her future husband. Jiang Fan, however, remained skeptical. After all, he had only returned to marry out of a sense of duty to support the Jiang family after his last relationship ended. To be perfectly honest, he hadn't taken this political marriage to heart at all, figuring they would stay together if it worked and divorce if it didn't. He doubted his mother's claims of love at first sight, yet after spending the afternoon together, we see a subtle shift in his perspective. While they weren't exactly close yet, he could tell from the small details that his fiancée was quite remarkable. Her beauty was, of course, top tier. As for her personality, she seemed incredibly gentle and kind, handling everything with a sense of order and grace that he hadn't expected. She was attentive, thoughtful, and clearly understood the nuances of social etiquette. Overall, he found himself genuinely pleased with this unexpected match. Beyond mere satisfaction, he felt a flicker of surprise, realizing his parents actually had excellent taste. Meanwhile, after a long night of drinking, Ningbing finally woke up, and her first instinct was to check her phone for a reply. More than 10 hours had passed, and the silence was deafening. The chat window remained stubbornly blank, and in a fit of frustration, Ningbing rubbed her eyes and hurled her phone against the wall. The crash startled everyone awake, their drunken haze vanishing as they realized Jiang Fan seemed to be playing a game of hard to get. Her friends quickly reassured her, telling her not to worry and promising to help her win him back. Yes, a group effort, apparently. As they crowded around to comfort her, Ningbing's mood finally began to lift, and the group headed straight from the bar to the airport. On the way, she stared blankly at the passing skyscrapers, feeling a pang of regret that she hadn't just agreed to go to Jingbei yesterday. The thought of her empty expectations weighed heavily on her, and she found herself sinking deeper into a sense of profound loss. She tried to tell herself that not going to the city was for the best, especially after hearing Shun Haoyu's words, which finally killed her hope. For years, she had wanted to give up, yet she had clung to that promise of the age of 28 like a lifeline. Being with Jiang Fan, while holding on to that fantasy, had pushed her to the brink of a mental breakdown. It was, to be honest, exhausting. She didn't know how to face a boyfriend who was so devoted to her, but now, the time had come to make a final choice. Testing the waters, she asked her friends if they thought she should try proposing marriage if she couldn't coax him back today. The word marriage made her friends' eyes widen in shock. To them, the idea seemed entirely out of the blue. They questioned if her parents would ever agree to her marrying Jiang Fan, given the vast difference in their family backgrounds. While they admitted he was handsome and kind, they argued he was fine for dating, but perhaps not quite a match for marriage. Despite their cold water, Ningbing wasn't listening. She leaned back, her mind drifting through memories of her time with him. We see her recalling how, after her 25th birthday, Jiang Fan would frequently drop hints about marriage to test her feelings. She had always known what he wanted and that his family was pressuring him, yet she had chosen to look the other way. Out of her own selfishness, she had pretended not to understand, but now that they were older, she realized she didn't want to lose him. Even though the road to marriage looked treacherous, she was suddenly willing to take the risk and try. And so, Ningbing finally resolved to propose in Jingbei, messaging her assistant to prepare everything they would need for the trip. She had her heart set on a pair of wedding rings that were trending online, and just before boarding, her assistant messaged her about them. The rings had been sold for a staggering 900 million, leaving Ningbing utterly shocked that a simple pair of bands could fetch such a price. Curious about who could afford such a luxury, Ningbing asked for the buyer's name, and the assistant replied with a single word, Lu, of the Jingbei Lu family. The name carried immense weight in their circles, making even Ningbing click her tongue in surprise, though she happened to be on good terms with the second Lu daughter. She decided to call her friend to ask about the rings, only to hear that the woman had bought them as a wedding gift for her younger sister. The friend explained they were a present for the new couple, adding that Ningbing had simply asked too late. It seems the third Lu daughter was getting married today. A flicker of surprise crossed Ningbing's eyes as she wondered why everyone seemed to be getting married on the same day. A popular date, apparently. Carefully choosing her words, she politely thanked her friend, blaming her own forgetfulness on having had a few too many drinks the night before. She asked her friend to pass along her congratulations to the bride, wondering aloud which lucky gentleman was fortunate enough to join such a family. The friend replied that her sister was marrying into the Jiang family, a perfect match in status. At the mention of the name Jiang, Ningbing froze. Naturally, her mind immediately jumped to Jiang Fan. She wondered if the wedding he was attending was this very union between the Lu and Jiang families. Could Jiang Fan actually have relatives or close friends among the elite of Jingbei? A flurry of strange, unsettling thoughts began to cloud her mind. But as she stepped off the plane, the biting winter wind swept those thoughts away. She shook her head and pressed her temples, trying to stay grounded. She told herself to push those ridiculous ideas aside. After all, he was just a boy from an ordinary county town. To be honest, the connection seemed impossible. How could he possibly be involved with the powerful Jiang family? Once they landed at the capital airport, Ningbing decided to give Jiang Fan a call. He still sounded upset, his voice barely audible over the noisy crowd around him, and his tone was anything but warm when he answered his ex-girlfriend. When he asked her what she wanted, the coldness of being called an ex made Ningbing's blood boil, reminding her of everything that had happened yesterday. She knew this wasn't the time for a tantrum, so she suppressed her anger and patiently explained that the breakup had just been a joke. She pleaded with him to believe her, but Jiang Fan wasn't interested in games. He told her flatly that he only believed what he saw with his own eyes. He informed her that there was no need for explanations because he was far too busy to chat, and with that, he prepared to end the conversation. Without waiting for her reaction, he simply hung up, leaving Ningbing's face dark with fury at his dismissive attitude. Her friends quickly stepped in to calm her, suggesting she save the argument and just use some sweet talk when they met. Only then did Ningbing's expression soften as she told them they were heading to Tinquan Villa, a name that gave them pause. The group exchanged uneasy glances, realizing this wasn't just any location, but the most famous luxury district in Jingbei. It was a place where a single cough from a resident could shake the entire city, making them wonder about Jiang Fan's friend. Ningbing felt a drumbeat of uncertainty in her heart as those nagging thoughts from the plane began to resurface once more. She couldn't help but wonder, could Jiang Fan truly be some distant relative of the powerful Jiang family? Meanwhile, we see that the wedding, meticulously planned by Lu Ruyan, was far more grand than anyone had anticipated. While a union between the Jiang and Lu families would naturally draw every VIP in the circle, the scale was staggering. With hundreds of tables set out, one had to wonder why such a massive venue was necessary for the occasion. Despite the winter sun, a chill lingered in the air, so countless heaters had been placed to ensure the guests' comfort. The stages were adorned with fresh flowers flown in from Europe, and the party favors were nothing short of extravagant. Each guest received a souvenir lock crafted from pure gold, a level of opulence that was almost hard to believe. Even for someone raised abroad, the sheer decadence was enough to make one wince at the cost of it all. As Rian approached to lead the way inside out of the cold, she offered a warm cup of coffee to her guest. Rian mentioned that someone had called asking for the location, wondering if a car should be sent to the gate. Confused, the guest checked the call records, only for her expression to shift when she saw the name Tang Yan. It seemed Tang Yan had arrived in Jingbei, a realization that brought a faint, unreadable smile to the woman's lips. She told Rian there was no need to fetch them, as they would find their own way in soon enough. Noticing cameras on the nearby hills, she suggested tightening security to ensure the massive event proceeded without any incidents. Yan didn't think much of it and agreed. Before leaving, she handed the soul ring to Jiang Fan and stepped out of the room. Only then did Jiang Fan let out the laughter he'd been holding back. The thought of Ningbing attending his wedding was almost too much. He could only imagine the look on her face when she saw him on that stage. He opened the ring box, but then he froze. Inside were the very rings he had seen in a magazine months ago, a pair he had once excitedly shared with Ningbing. Back then, he had pictured himself on one knee, proposing to her with those rings. Life, as we know, has a cruel sense of irony. Just 2 weeks after that dream, he discovered her affair with Shun Haoyu. Now, he had the wedding and the rings, but a different bride. And to be honest, that was for the best. He felt no lingering nostalgia for their 7 years together, only a profound sense of relief. At exactly 11 o'clock, the wedding began. Under the gaze of the elite crowd, the ceremony finally reached its peak. Mr. Liu led his daughter down the aisle, placing her hand in Jiang Fan's as they proceeded through the traditional rites. The moment arrived to exchange rings. But just as Rian reached for his hand, a sudden commotion erupted from the audience. Jiang Fan looked over and saw Ningbing. She looked nearly frantic, pushing through the crowd as if she had lost her mind. She shoved past anyone in her way, her eyes locked onto the stage, while her friends followed behind her like a small army. They were shouting his name, and naturally, this unexpected drama captured the attention of every single guest in the room. Despite the judgmental whispers and curious stares, Jiang Fan remained perfectly calm as he turned to look at Rian. Seeing her confusion and rising anger, he leaned in to explain that these were simply some old friends from his hometown. He asked for a few minutes to handle the situation, and with Rian's hesitant nod, he signaled for the staff to pause the music. Security had already restrained the group and was preparing to drag them out, but they stopped when Jiang Fan raised his hand. Throughout it all, Ningbing's gaze never wavered from him. She watched him, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. Seeing him in his groom's suit, looking so composed, her temper finally flared. She demanded to know if he was the friend he mentioned. Jiang Fan found himself wanting to laugh. In any normal situation, this would be a tragedy, but here, it was almost a comedy. The phrase, "I have a friend," usually implies the speaker themselves, and Ningbing was nearly laughing with rage. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her eyes were burning with fury as she demanded to know if this was his reason for marrying behind her back. But what did she mean by behind her back? The news of the Jiang and Lu union had been fermenting online for over a month. The mention of the two families seemed to trigger a memory, and Ningbing suddenly snapped her head to the side to look at the bride, Rian. This face bore a striking resemblance to her sister, Lu Yunsheng, and Ningbing recognized her instantly. Her pupils dilated in shock. The muscles around her mouth trembled, her entire being radiating pure disbelief. Rian's groom was actually Jiang Fan. But who exactly was Jiang Fan? Behind her, Tang Yin and the others realized the weight of the situation and cried out in shock. They asked if he was truly a member of the prestigious Jiang family of Jingbei. He watched them calmly, showing a great deal of patience. He introduced himself as the next heir of the Jiang family, the only son of Jiang Shuming and Yi Xing, and Rian's fiancée. He asked if they had any further doubts about his identity. That long list of titles was enough to strike all 6 of them silent. In their own circles, these young ladies could certainly command the wind and rain, but this was Jingbei, the heart of the capital. Their family backgrounds were simply not enough to compete with the Jiang and Lu families. After a long silence, Ningbing finally spoke. With a hoarse voice, she asked the one question that mattered most to her. Why had he never told her the truth before? He countered by asking if she hadn't hidden many things from him as well, like that promise she made for when she turned 28. Those words turned Ningbing's face deathly pale. She began to struggle again, desperately trying to explain herself to him. She claimed she could explain everything, admitting she hadn't forgotten Shen Haoyu, but insisting that during those 7 years, she was cut off mid-sentence by Rian, who had been watching the scene unfold quietly. She calmly told security to take them away. Rian took his hand and spoke to him gently, suggesting that now was not the right time to handle these personal matters. She proposed inviting his friends to a private dinner after the wedding, noting that they shouldn't keep the other guests waiting. He hadn't expected Rian to be so decisive at such a critical moment. He nodded in agreement, though many questions remained in his mind. We returned to the center of the stage, where Rian took his arm and led him back. The light piano music began to play once more. Amidst a chorus of congratulations, the couple completed their exchange of rings. At the moment the bouquet was tossed into the air, petals, feathers, and ribbons drifted down from above. The dazzling midday sun fell upon Rian, illuminating her features. She looked exquisite, but he simply turned away, choosing to look toward the future instead of the past. After the grand wedding concluded, he felt a wave of exhaustion. Reflecting on the day's chaotic events, he decided it was finally time to have an honest talk with Rian. He asked if she had any questions about what had happened. Rian, who was in the middle of washing her face, paused for a moment. She glanced at him calmly. She told him that if he wanted to speak, she would listen, but if he preferred silence, she had no questions. This gentle, middle-ground attitude took him by surprise. For the first time, he realized he might have married someone quite extraordinary. He asked if she wasn't curious about his relationship with those people or worried about the complications behind today's drama. Rian sat down on a soft chair, her eyes full of composure. She admitted she was curious and even a little worried, but added that none of it truly mattered. What mattered was that the wedding was a success. He was her husband, and they would face tomorrow together. She explained that while she would be happy if he shared his past, she would also understand if he chose not to speak of it. After all, the past is gone, and there is no use dwelling on things that cannot be changed. In that moment, he felt the vast difference between her and the people he used to know. Moved by her words, he decided there was no longer any need to hide the truth from her. He told her plainly that the group at the wedding consisted of his ex-girlfriend and her friends. They had been together for 7 years. He had intended to marry her, but realized she loved someone else. Upon discovering this, he broke up with her and returned to Jingbei. Since his parents were pressuring him to marry, he agreed to the arrangement. He had only officially ended things with her yesterday. She hadn't known he was a Jiang, which led to the scene at the wedding. As he spoke, a subtle expression crossed Rian's face. She noted that breaking up one day and marrying the next seemed a bit hasty. He admitted that it probably was, but reminded her that this was a business marriage. As long as they maintained the appearance of a stable couple to the outside world, that would be enough. His matter-of-fact expression caused a faint smile to play on Rian's lips. She asked if he truly didn't care what kind of person his new partner was. He admitted he wasn't particularly concerned, as his only goal was to inherit the Jiang group as soon as possible. Hearing this, Rian's heart skipped a beat. She stared at him intently for a long time before giving a soft, slow nod. Meanwhile, we see Ningbing being dragged hundreds of meters by security. She had never endured such humiliation in her life, and her friends weren't faring much better. They were all tossed unceremoniously at the villa gates. Facing dozens of guards, they were fuming but dared not speak. Below the steps, however, stood hundreds of reporters with cameras, eager for any scrap of news. A few sharp-eyed journalists recognized Ningbing immediately and rushed forward, shouting questions as they surrounded the disheveled group. They asked if she had been invited to the wedding of the third Miss Lu and Mr. Jiang, noting that she didn't exactly look her best. They pressed her for details on what had happened inside. To be honest, it was the last thing she wanted to deal with at that moment. With one reporter leading the charge, the crowd surged forward to snap photos. Ningbing, already in a foul mood, was pushed to her breaking point. Seeing her own pathetic state captured on film, she exploded in rage, shoving people aside and smashing several expensive cameras to the ground. She stormed off with her entourage, but the damage was done. That night, the news of Ningbing assaulting reporters topped every entertainment headline. The reputation of the Bai group plummeted overnight. Negative press flooded in, and no amount of money from the Bai family could stop the tide. When Haoyu finally called, Ningbing was locked in a hotel room, reeking of alcohol. He asked tentatively if the man marrying into the Liu family was Jiang Fan. He wanted to know if it was true that Jiang Fan was actually a member of the prestigious Jiang family, which, as we know, he certainly was. She snapped back, asking what it mattered if he was. Upon hearing her confirmation, Haoyu's voice took on a distinct note of excitement. He mentioned that Rushue had just told him about a joint project being prepared by the Bai, Jiang, Liu, and Shin families. The final decision for this project rested with the authorities in Jingbei. He pointed out that since she had dated him for 7 years, perhaps she could find a way to ask him for a favor to secure the project for them. Even in her drunken state, Ningbing retained a shred of logic. She let out a cold, desperate laugh, asking for help. She reminded Haoyu that the man had already married Rian. Haoyu dismissed this, arguing that 7 years together surely meant something, even if they had technically broken up. A bold assumption, to say the least. Haoyu urged her to try, suggesting that Jiang Fan would surely still feel some lingering affection. He added that her father, Uncle Bai, had called him in a fury asking for her location. He argued that if she could secure this project, her father would likely cool off and overlook the day's scandals. It was a desperate gamble, but a logical one. After hearing this advice, Ningbing felt her resolve waver slightly. However, she didn't dare promise too much, giving only a vague, non-committal answer before hanging up. She struggled to her feet and headed to the bathroom to splash cold water on her face. The shock of the water helped clear her mind of the alcoholic haze. A few minutes later, Tang Yin knocked and entered, immediately pulling her into a discussion about the project. Ningbing, however, seemed miles away. She leaned back on the sofa, her gaze cold and distant as she stared out the window, her thoughts a tangled mess. This project was a massive prize, a truly lucrative opportunity. It was the kind of deal everyone wanted. Power players from Jingbei, Hushan, and even Hong Kong and Macau were all fighting for a piece of the pie. The 4 great families of Hushan had only united to ensure they could swallow it whole. According to the intelligence they had gathered, the person in charge of the project would almost certainly be Jiang Zhiyao, Jiang Fan's own aunt. If she could use him to establish that connection, the work would be halfway done already. After a long silence, Ningbing decided to give it a try. It wasn't just for the project. Deep down, she selfishly wanted any excuse to see him one more time. The day after the wedding, once the marriage certificate was signed, Jiang Fan went straight to the Jiang Group headquarters to take up his post as vice president. To help him adjust quickly, his father assigned him several trusted secretaries and assistants. He spent the entire day buried in files and corporate reports. By the time he finally had a grasp of the group's internal affairs, he looked up to find that night had fallen. It was already 8 o'clock in the evening. The entire building was dark, save for the light in his office. He was surprised when Rian appeared, asking her what she was doing there at such an hour. Rian gave a soft, somewhat helpless smile. She reminded him that it was only their 2nd day of marriage, and technically, they should still be on their wedding leave. Only then did he remember leaving the Civil Affairs Bureau that morning. He had been so focused on work that he had completely forgotten about the world outside. He admitted he lacked experience in being married and had overlooked such things. He noted that wedding leaves and honeymoons were usually for ordinary couples. Since theirs was merely a business alliance, he assumed there was no need for celebration. At those words, a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of disappointment crossed Rian's eyes. She quickly masked her emotions, however, and opened the passenger door of the car to sit inside. She told him that if he was too busy, they didn't have to celebrate. But since they were married, she wondered if the busy Vice President Jiang might at least agree to have dinner with her. A modest request, all things considered. Her tone carried a hint of playful teasing, which brought a rare smile to Jiang Fan's face as he readily agreed and got into the car. They headed to a famous Western restaurant for dinner, but since it was peak hour and they arrived late, all the private rooms were fully booked. Jiang Fan was too hungry to bother searching elsewhere, so with Rian's consent, they took a seat at a quiet corner table by the window. Rian handed the menu directly to him and began introducing the restaurant's signature dishes. Following her suggestions, we see him looking through the options. He ordered 4 or 5 dishes he liked before handing the menu back, but Rian didn't add anything else. He asked if she was sure, noting his tastes might be a bit unique. To be honest, he was worried she was simply being polite. She told him that they should both try new things and slowly adapt. After all, they were married, not sold into service, and both deserved to eat what they liked. She encouraged him not to overthink things and to speak his mind freely, reminding him that they could discuss and negotiate anything. He asked if that included the canceled honeymoon. Seeing her look so serious, we realized she had been waiting for the right moment to bring this up. Jiang Fan had expected a business request, so the sudden mention of a honeymoon caught him off guard. It was, perhaps, the last thing on his mind. He asked if she truly wanted to go. She explained that after the exhaustion of the wedding, she simply wanted a chance to rest for a while. Furthermore, both families hoped they would bond quickly, and she felt a honeymoon was the perfect opportunity. She then asked for his thoughts. Hearing her sincere tone, the excuses Jiang Fan had prepared died in his throat. He realized he couldn't simply dismiss her feelings. In all fairness, Rian was proving to be an excellent wife who respected his opinions at every turn. To him, a honeymoon was a trivial matter. Not wanting to hurt her over something so small, he agreed. Upon hearing his answer, Rian's smile grew noticeably brighter and more radiant. She suggested that once his current busy streak ended, she would handle the arrangements. Meanwhile, we see a shadow watching them from afar. Ningbing had waited outside the Jiang group all day just to catch a glimpse of him. She had followed them to the restaurant, hoping for a private moment. But Jiang Fan never left his seat. The sight of him laughing with Rian and sharing food stung Ningbing more deeply than she cared to admit. For 2 hours, she didn't touch a bite of her own food, her eyes fixed on his warm, smiling face. Finally, she saw her chance when he stood up. As he headed toward the restroom, Ningbing hurried after him and called out his name in the hallway, asking him why he was doing this. He turned around, a flicker of surprise in his eyes as he reminded her that, if he remembered correctly, they had already broken up. He asked what his marriage had to do with her, and his indifferent tone made Ningbing feel as though she were being utterly dismissed. A surge of anger rose in her heart as she pointed out that the marriage between the Jiang and Liu families had been set over a month ago. She accused him of finding a replacement before they had even split, while he simply crossed his arms and glanced at her coldly. He admitted calmly that he had planned to return north to marry a month ago, but asked why she was the one who was angry. He noted that since she had planned for 7 years to break up on Hao Yu's birthday, his 1 month of planning was hardly a crime. His words left Ningbing speechless, her fists clenched as she struggled to swallow the bitterness and regret rising in her chest. Still, she tried to defend herself, insisting that the situation between her and Hao Yu wasn't what he thought it was. She claimed she knew Hao Yu didn't love her, but because of their long history and a certain promise, he had become an obsession. She told him she truly wanted to be with him, and that on the way to Jingbei, she had actually prepared for a future together. She even claimed to have picked out a wedding ring, pleading with him to believe her just this once. To be honest, it was a bit late for that. He countered that she only remembered him, her backup plan, because she had been rejected. Unfortunately for her, he was already married. He suggested with unmasked irony that she should go propose to Hao Yu instead, as perhaps he might actually say yes this time. The mockery caused Ningbing visible pain. She stepped forward to grab his hand, but we see him move away before she can touch him. She insisted she never loved Hao Yu and had simply been foolish, only realizing the truth after that disastrous birthday party. She confessed that over the last 7 years, she had grown used to having him by her side and truly intended to marry him. Initially, he thought she might have a shred of sincerity despite her double dealing, but hearing this now only made him feel slightly nauseous. He pointed out that she hated Hao Yu for treating her as a backup, yet she failed to see the irony in her own behavior. He noted how she seemed moved by her own devotion after waiting 7 years, as if her feelings were some grand, tragic masterpiece. He asked if, while hating Hao Yu, she realized she was fundamentally no different from him. After all, they both treated people like options. He told her she was merely bitter about being strung along, yet she did the same to him. They were two of a kind, so there was no need for this performance. In an instant, the color drained from Ningbing's face, leaving her pale as a ghost as her dramatic display of regret crumbled before his eyes. He truly didn't care about her feelings anymore and had no desire to continue this entanglement, so he turned toward the hall. But as they passed each other, Ningbing couldn't help herself and reached out to grab him. His patience had finally reached its limit, and he roughly shook her off as they struggled. Suddenly, an old, dilapidated chandelier above them creaked and snapped, plummeting directly toward his head. It was a moment of genuine danger. In a split-second reflex, Ningbing pushed him out of the way. There was a heavy thud as the massive iron fixture slammed into her shoulder instead. Thrown several meters away, he happened to run right into Rian, who had just arrived. She looked back in shock at the scene unfolding behind them. There lay Ningbing on the floor, curled into a ball of agony, her left hand desperately clutching her right shoulder. It looked incredibly painful, to be honest. Her face turned a deep crimson from the sheer intensity of the pain. Nearby waiters rushed over immediately to check on the extent of Ningbing's injuries. Rian frowned with concern, asking him if he was hurt. Once she confirmed he was unharmed, she breathed a sigh of relief and led him away. As she watched their retreating figures walking hand in hand, Ningbing lay on the cold floor, biting her lip to keep from crying out in front of the crowd. She couldn't stop the muffled sobs in her throat, however. She closed her eyes in despair as a flood of memories began to wash over her mind. Every memory involved him. We see how he used to stay by her side whenever she was ill, tirelessly contacting doctors and monitoring her condition. When she would bump into a wall and bruise her arm, he would immediately boil eggs to massage the injury. He was quite devoted in his own way. During her bouts of insomnia, he would fight back his own exhaustion to play soft music and cook warm soup for her. Back then, her needs were his priority. But now, even though she had been injured saving him, he showed no reaction at all. He simply walked away with another woman without a second glance. In this moment, Ningbing finally realized with crushing certainty that the man standing before her was no longer the person she once knew. He didn't care for her anymore, and he certainly didn't love her. Later, once he arrived home, his nerves finally began to settle as he sipped hot tea. Recalling the chaos at the party still made his heart race a little. He turned to Rian, intending to vent about the absurdity of the evening, but stopped. He saw her kneeling down beside him with a first aid kit. He told her he wasn't hurt, but Rian didn't answer, her focus entirely on him. She didn't answer, but simply pointed toward his ankle. Following her gaze, he finally noticed that the back of his heel had been grazed by a glass shard, leaving a small cut. Rian picked up a cotton swab soaked in alcohol, warning him it might sting. Normally, he wouldn't have given such a minor scratch a second thought, so seeing Rian so genuinely concerned made him feel a bit embarrassed. He told her it was nothing to worry about, yet the moment the alcohol touched the wound, he couldn't help but hiss through his teeth. After disinfecting it, Rian applied a bandage and mentioned she'd have waterproof covers sent over. She reminded him to be careful while showering and to avoid getting the wound wet. If he had to go out, she suggested he just wear slippers for now. Having left home young to live with his aunt and spending 10 years alone through college and romance, this was the first time anyone had made such a fuss over a tiny scratch. Surprised by her intensity, he tried to lighten the mood with a small joke, saying the wound might be healed by the time her supplies arrived. Rian looked up at him with a look of absolute sincerity he had never seen before. She told him his injury was due to her own oversight, and she felt responsible. To her, any wound causes pain, and she didn't want him to suffer any physical discomfort after such a shock. She admitted she was being fussy, but insisted it was for the best. She asked him to just listen to her this once. Whether it was the sincerity in her voice or the flicker of self-reproach in her eyes, Afin felt his heart skip a beat. Unable to meet her gaze directly, he looked down and gave a small nod. After Rian left with the first aid kit, he received a call from Tang Yen. She immediately accused him of being heartless, asking how he could ignore Ningbing after she was seriously injured saving him. Listening to this baseless accusation, he had no intention of letting her smear his character. He let out a cold laugh. He pointed out that if Ningbing hadn't been clinging to him, the chandelier never would have fallen toward his head. Her injury was her own doing. Tang Yen countered that regardless of the circumstances, Ningbing had pushed him out of harm's way at a critical moment. She asked if he truly had no old feelings left. He found himself almost admiring her shameless ability to twist the truth. Afin was tired of her ability to twist black into white and didn't care to waste more words. Glancing at the bandage on his ankle, he decided to spin a small lie, claiming he'd love to visit, but his leg was injured and he couldn't leave the house. A silence stretched for 10 seconds over the phone before she cleared her throat, her tone softening slightly. She said if he couldn't come, so be it, but a debt of gratitude still had to be repaid. She suggested that since the Yundao project launch was in a month, he should have his secretary send over a few invitations to settle the score. So, that was her real plan all along. He couldn't help but let out a couple of dry chuckles at the transparency of it. He casually agreed to the request just to end the call. Afterward, he sent a few messages to his aunt to ask about the project's specific details and requested she send the invitations the next day. Over the following days, no matter what he did, Rian was always right there with him. At first, he tried to urge her to attend to her own affairs, but she repeatedly used their marriage as an excuse to stay. Gradually, we see him realized that whenever Rian was around, she could offer insightful advice on any work problem he encountered. He soon grew accustomed to her presence, spending every day together. The two of them quickly became quite close. When he worked late, Rian would bring her laptop and sit quietly by his side, tending to her own business. On the rare occasions she had to go out, she would check in with him immediately. During their downtime, she would even take him out on dates, showing him many novel, interesting places and little gadgets he'd never seen. Half a month later, during the spring festival, the Jiang and Liu families decided to gather to celebrate the new year together. Over a dozen family members sat around the table, chatting vibrantly. Naturally, the conversation revolved almost entirely around the newlywed couple. Afin's mother looked on with a face full of comfort at him and Rian sitting together. She sighed, noting that Afin's stubborn streak was exactly like his aunt's. To be honest, it ran in the family. She mentioned how she had asked him to return to Jingbei after graduation, but he refused, insisting on making it on his own. She felt she had no control over him. She turned to Rian, telling her that if he ever behaved poorly, she would have to be patient with him. Hearing his mother complain about him in front of so many people made Afin feel a bit indignant. Just as he was about to defend himself, Rian placed a freshly peeled orange into his hand. With a gentle smile, she told his mother she was overstating things, and that she didn't find Afin stubborn at all, but rather very independent and decisive. She added that he would surely lead the Jiang family well alongside his aunt, and she hoped to learn much from him. She added that she certainly couldn't hold him back. After she spoke, the Liu family joined in the praise, leaving Afin's mother beaming with joy. Her voice was full of delight as she noted that as long as the two of them got along, the elders would be happy, and if they could have a child soon, they would be even happier. Several other elders began to tease them as well, causing Afin's face and ears to turn a deep shade of red. Rian noticed the change in his expression and quickly made an excuse to lead him out to the garden. Once the cold winter wind hit him, his complexion finally began to return to normal. With a slight smile playing on her lips, Rian decided to change the subject. She asked if he was attending the banquet tomorrow. He confirmed he was, noting that since he sent Ningbing the invitation, he had to keep an eye on her. He wanted to see what she was really up to. Rian then asked if there were any extra invitations, as she wanted one for herself. Hearing this, he looked up at her with eyes full of surprise. He noted the project was decent, but weren't she and her sister busy with the Yuanchuan project lately? He teased her, asking if she really wanted to scout the competition at such a critical time. She knew he was joking, and she blinked rapidly as she responded. She wasn't actually interested in the project. It was simply that during the holidays, she had nothing else to do and simply wanted to go out with him. He nodded in understanding, remembering he had only one invitation left. He took her downstairs to find his aunt. The project banquet was set for 7 o'clock at the largest hotel in Jingbei. The project manager stepped onto the stage to announce the official start. However, the Jiang family car was stuck in traffic and arrived half an hour late. The moment they pushed the doors open, his aunt was surrounded by opportunistic guests who had been waiting for her arrival. Seeing the crowd, he had no desire to join the chaos. He pulled Rian away from the throng and slipped inside. Since neither of them was there for the project itself, they strolled leisurely through the hall, sampling the fine food and red wine. Meanwhile, standing on the second floor, Ningbing leaned against the railing with a glass of champagne. She immediately spotted Afin whispering intimately with Rian. Over the past month, she had thought a lot and had finally given up on him. He was a Jiang, and he had married a Lu. Neither family was one she could afford to offend, so she kept telling herself to let go of the past and face reality. And yet, despite all her mental preparation, seeing the two of them appear together in such an intimate manner made her heart ache. Deep down, she still felt a lingering sense of resentment, and her expression darkened instantly. Beside her, Shun Haoyu followed her gaze and spotted Afin. His eyes lit up for a moment as he pulled Xia Rushua toward the stairs. Seeing this, Tang Yin quickly grabbed by Ningbing and followed after them. The four of them wove through the crowd until they stood directly before our protagonist. Tang Yin greeted Rian, noting it had been a long time. She mentioned hearing about her recent wedding and offered her congratulations. Afin simply replied with a polite thank you, and then silence fell. The atmosphere turned cold. Finding it hard to speak, Xia Rushua gave Shun Haoyu a meaningful look, prompting him to step forward and wave at Afin. He asked if Afin remembered him, reminding him they had met once 2 months ago. Afin acknowledged him politely, noting it had indeed been a while. Hearing his voice, Bai Ningbing finally looked up, only to meet Afin's cold, indifferent gaze. She greeted him softly, noting how long it had been. She asked if he had recovered from the injuries he sustained that day. He replied that, thanks to her, he was recovering quite well, a rather pointed remark. That meaningful tone made Ningbing's heart tremble, and a look of guilt washed over her face. She felt an instinctive urge to explain herself. But before she could speak, Rian interrupted. She explained that she and Afin were accompanying his aunt to the banquet and hadn't expected to see Rushua here. She wondered what business brought them all the way to Jingbei. Upon hearing this, Tang Yin nudged Rushua, signaling her to seize the opportunity. Rushua explained that their families were interested in the Yundao project and wanted to take a look. To be honest, their timing was quite deliberate. She noted that since Afin's aunt was the project manager, she wondered if Rian could help introduce them, given their past relationship. Rian didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked up at Afin, silently seeking his opinion on the matter before making a move. After a brief exchange of glances, Rian spoke up. She noted that while they wanted to help, his aunt was clearly too busy to be disturbed. She suggested it might be inconvenient at the moment. It was a polite rejection, really, but the message was perfectly clear to everyone involved. The three of them shared a look, understanding the refusal. Not wanting to cause offense, they exchanged a few pleasantries and took their leave. Only Ningbing remained, staring at Afin as if she had more to say. Not wishing to deal with her, he simply took Rian's hand and walked away. Yet, like a lost soul, she followed them from the hall to the second floor and finally into the garden. Once they were alone, Rian turned around. She asked if Ningbing had something specific to say to her and her husband. Only then did Ningbing realize just how inappropriate her behavior had become. She quickly apologized, claiming she had simply had too much to drink and had lost her way in a moment of confusion. Hearing this rather clumsy excuse, Rian let out a soft, cold laugh. She noted that while a momentary lapse in judgment was one thing, one must be careful not to remain confused forever. She reminded her that while Afin might value old ties, she and the Bai family had no history together. The underlying thread in those words caused Ningbing's heart to sink. She was well aware of the Lu family's immense power. She knew that with just a few words from Rian, the Bai family could vanish from the city overnight. To be honest, it wasn't a risk she could take. Unable to gamble with her family's future, she bit her lip, swallowed her pride, and turned back toward the main hall. Meanwhile, back at the banquet, Rushua was pleading with President Jiang, mentioning their connection to her nephew and asking her to accept a toast. Ningbing didn't know exactly what had transpired, but the moment she heard those words, she realized something had gone terribly wrong. She rushed through the crowd toward the center of the hall, but before she could offer an apology, she saw the situation escalate. Afin's aunt had already picked up the phone to call security. Suddenly, a heavy silence fell over the entire room. The other guests watched with varying degrees of amusement as the faces of the four intruders turned pale with embarrassment. The aunt announced that this was a formal banquet for the Yundao project, not a place for seeking backdoors or shortcuts. She warned the guests to focus on the upcoming presentation and avoid such underhanded tactics, lest they be thrown out as well. As a dozen security guards escorted the four out, we see Afin and Rian returning to the hall. They paused at the entrance to watch the scene. They shared a knowing look, both seeing the quiet satisfaction in each other's eyes. Inside, the host announced that the meeting was about to begin. With the troublemakers gone, Afin felt no desire to stay. He took Rian's hand and suggested they head home, and she, of course, agreed. After sending a quick message to his aunt, they drove away. For the past few days, they had been staying at the old family residence. The house felt quiet and empty since the servants were away for the holidays, so the two of them curled up on the sofa to watch a movie. As midnight approached, Afin suddenly developed a craving for sweet dumplings. But since it was a holiday, all the nearby shops were closed. He sighed deeply, looking at the delivery unavailable message on his phone. Seeing his disappointed face, Ruyan smiled tenderly and headed for the kitchen. We see Ruyan heading straight for the kitchen, where she manages to find a bag of glutinous rice flour tucked away in a cupboard. Afin follows her, his eyes lighting up with surprise as he asks if she actually knows how to make sweet dumplings from scratch. Seeing his curiosity, Ruyan pulls out 2 aprons and hands him one, suggesting they simply find a tutorial and learn together. It seemed simple enough, so they spent over an hour huddled over a phone screen, carefully following the instructions step by step. Eventually, they managed to roll out a few dumplings, though they were all different sizes and shapes. A bit of a mess, to be honest. As the water boiled, Ruyan took the plate from him, worried he might burn himself, and asked him to go fetch 2 bowls instead. By the time the 2 bowls of dumplings were finally served, midnight had already passed, marking the start of a new day. Afin scooped up the largest dumpling in his bowl and showed it off to Rian, boasting that his luck was sure to be the best this year. Rian watched him with a tender smile as he took a big bite, though his proud expression suddenly froze for a split second. He quickly recovered, his eyes darting around as he nodded enthusiastically, holding the spoon out to her and insisting she try it. Rian took one look at that oversized dumpling and knew instantly it wasn't fully cooked, yet she didn't hesitate for a single moment. She leaned down and ate the remaining half, while Afin struggled to hide a mischievous smirk, covering his face with his hand. He asked if it was good, and to his surprise, she gave him a thumbs up, her face lighting up with genuine delight. She claimed it was perfectly sweet and chewy, just the way she liked it, and her eyes sparkled with such sincerity it was hard to doubt her. Still, Afin trusted his own taste buds more. He set his spoon down and playfully tilted her chin up, trying to peek into her mouth. But Rian was too quick and swallowed the evidence immediately, leaving him with nothing to see when he finally got her to open up. A look of disappointment crossed his face as he accused her of lying, certain that the dough had been completely raw. The two of them began to play fight and tease one another, eventually tumbling off the sofa in a fit of laughter. This program is brought to you by the Yo-Yo television series Exclusive Theater. Thank you for watching this Yo-Yo television series exclusive presentation. This program is brought to you by the Yo-Yo television series Exclusive Theater. Thank you for watching this Yo-Yo television series exclusive presentation.